Welcome to Bad Game Summer, an annual series of videos I invented last year where the idea is that while some people are enjoying some fruity drink on the beach or going on vacations with their families, I would torture myself with bad games for your entertainment. The upside to this is that I can still have fruity drinks and wear my bathing suit in my office at home, and you will be none the wiser so long as I don't drink too much and video it. Though maybe that'll get me more than 20 views a video. Today's game is Lair, a first-generation PS3 game from 2007 that features dragons, air combat, and motion controls, and it doesn't really execute any of these things particularly well. Failure doesn't always mean the end, though. Just ask everybody who writes for that perpetual turd mill that is Disney and Marvel. Now, Lair deserves points for its innovation, because this is one of the few games on the PS3 that use the motion controls of the 6-axis or DualShock 3 controller. If you wanted motion controls on anything else, you just had the Wii, which had some excellent games over the life of the console, but was also host to a metric ton of garbage itself, or you had the Xbox 360's Kinect, which wasn't even going to be released for another few years in 2010. Anyway, that's neither here nor there because this game is average in some ways and falls right on its scaly face in a few others. Let's start with the story. Lair takes place in a world where there's two kingdoms. You have the aristocratic and fancy-pants Sicilians, and the poor and destitute Mokai, who have very little in the way of food and resources and likely live in the mobile home park behind that crackhead-frequented gas station you drive by every day. And that's not mean. You and I know the only place that gets robbed more is your local Waffle House at 3 a.m. Anyway, the Mokai attack the Sicilians out of desperation for survival, and that leads to them being at war. So you play as this guy named Roan Partridge, not any relation to these partridges, unfortunately, who is in the Sicilian Sky Guard, which is basically like the Air Force, but with dragons. Each level has Roan completing certain missions like destroying catapults or ballistas, taking down enemy dragon, rider, fighter, pilot people, or you'll land and kill a ton of enemy soldiers on foot. Telling the difference between friendly targets and enemies is difficult because there's not only a lot going on, but enemy dragons and soldiers can be kind of hard to see. To help with this, you can hit a button on the D-pad to highlight your targets in red. Problem is, it also turns the rest of your field of view monochrome and makes everything else kind of difficult to see. So on one hand, I wanted to keep it on so I could see my targets easier, but then it also makes it harder to see anything else or enjoy the action that's happening all around. As I said, throughout each level are multiple missions to complete. Unfortunately, a lot of these missions consist of escort missions. If you've played video games for a while, you've probably experienced the misery of these, and if you haven't, then maybe play the lottery because you're pretty lucky. Escort missions rely on your ability to protect a target. That target is almost always suicidal and severely retarded and will just sit there and let itself get murdered while you're trying to kill a ton of bad guys who, out of nowhere, have the skill and aim of Sniper Chris Kyle. It's like if you're in The Godfather and you have to protect Sonny Corleone in an escort mission that starts right before he reaches the toll booth. I will say that the best thing about these missions, and possibly the game, is that you'll get yelled at by your comrades for making mistakes like friendly fire, which is actual fire in this game because dragons, and in escort missions in particular, screwing up or letting something or someone get killed shows a badly animated cutscene of the target dying, and it's actually pretty funny. Like there's a mission where you have to protect these giant flying manta rays, and yes, I know what I just said, and it gets worse, I promise. And letting these things get killed shows them exploding with showers of low-res blood and chunks, and it reminds me of the beached whales when they explode. Speaking of low-res, the graphics can vary in this. Enemies far away will have their frame rate cut in half, which I know helps the console run the game, but other than the dragons and some of the cutscenes, the rest of the game's graphics, they look just okay. But that's it for the funny stuff, because it's all downhill after that. Up until the game was patched, the only way to steer the dragon was with motion controls, and they weren't nearly as responsive as they should have been. You basically tilt the controller where you want the dragon to go, and snap it upward to make the thing do a 180, which I still don't agree with the physics of how it does that in the game, but whatever. The analogs control the camera, which after you release the sticks, they'll snap back to a forward view. Dragon flies really slowly unless you hit the X button to get it to speed up, kind of like if you smack a horse to make it gallop, but in this it looks like you're hitting the dragon in the head with your mace. I don't know how this guy ends up having a dragon be loyal to him, because if I'm a dragon and someone smacked me on the head to make me speed up, I'd eat him. Anyways, you have to repeatedly tap the X button if you want to keep going fast, which is really irritating. So to sum up the time that you're flying around, you're fighting the camera to see what's going on, then you're hitting the D-pad to look for your targets, while also you're trying to tilt the controller to steer to your targets, then you're hitting X to go to a speed faster than frozen molasses, and then you're finally hitting the other face buttons to attack the targets. If all of this sounds clunky, it's because it is. After the patch was released, you can choose to steer the dragon with analog controls, but all that changes is the steering. The other controls are actually unchanged, including attacks that require motion controls, so I don't really even know what the point was of even making this patch. The people who would have wanted this probably stopped playing the game long before the patch came out. The combat itself is average at best. You'll fly around and get yelled at by the computer to tell you to do something, and then you fly over to do it. I like the fact that these dragon riders aren't remotely close to each other yet can yell while flying through the sky, mind you, and still be able to hear each other to issue commands. You can shoot fireballs, you can breathe fire, pick up enemies when prompted, which by the way is the best part of the combat. I'd pick enemies up and fly them over the ocean to drop them, but instead it would fling them at like Mach 10, miles away from me, either ahead or straight into the sky. It's like the dragon is trying to throw everybody into space. At some points in the game, hitting both L2 and R2 lets you land on the ground, and you can then swipe at enemies or blow them up with fireballs, and you can also eat enemy soldiers. None of this was very responsive, so half the time I'd try to eat someone, I'd just get the hell beat out of me by enemies and I'd lose the health I gained by eating, so it was totally pointless. There's also times during combat where you're going to get into these mid-air fights with other dragons, where you're stuck to each other and you're swiping and biting until one of you is dead. The animation here is really crummy, and it reminds me of every time I've watched girls fight in school also, and anybody who's seen that knows how dirty they fight, and that you never, ever get in the middle of it. While all of this craziness is going on, as if the combat wasn't confusing enough, the camera can be really awful at times, especially when the action gets especially frantic and you're trying to look around and attack at the same time. On several occasions, the camera would spaz out and obscure my view, basically forcing me to just mash the attack buttons until it was done having a seizure and was able to correct itself again. Anyways, that's about all there is to Lair. It's an unintentionally funny game with really crummy motion controls and camera, but it's also a game that you can see could have been pretty decent had they gotten all the technical issues worked out before releasing it. It wasn't a great way to show off the 6-axis early in the PS3's life, though I think this game was largely ignored by all the people who didn't want to buy a PS3 because they were $600 at launch and that was an egregious price. It was another case of Sony getting too big for its britches, which I think we're seeing again now that the PS5 generation is in full swing. That's it for today's review. It's not even August yet, which means there's more bad games for me to shame this summer. You know what to do if you liked the video and want to see more. Until next time. Congratulations! You're one of an elite few to make it to the end of the video. Reward yourself by hitting the round subscribe button in the middle, and then check out the other goodies I've got in the links next to it.